Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Anthony Milewski, who's the founder of the Oregon Group. Anthony, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome. So I want to dive into what you do and how you do it and why you do it. But before we get started, give us a little bit of your background and your story and how did you get into your business?
Yeah, well, the funny thing about the story is, just like so many people and things, is it kind of happened by circumstance. You know, I was in graduate school and I had studied Russian, actually. And I was applying for jobs, and I got a job in London, and they asked me, they said, Anthony, we see, on your resume here, you speak Russian. And I said, well, kind of. I took some classes. and they said, well, why don't you go work in the Russia office? So at the time, there was a huge boom going on, and, these Russian companies were listing in London, and I said, all right, let's go. So they sent me over there, and all of the companies at the time that I was working on were natural resource companies. They were oil and gas companies and coal companies and really everything touching the physical world. And I think by circumstance or happenstance, I should say, I sort of fell into commodities. And so my first job was in the commodities business. And then from there, through time, I worked at investment bank and a hedge fund and private equity fund before ultimately kind of going out on my own. But if you had asked me just a year before when I was in school, what was I going to do? I would have told you I didn't know. And I certainly wouldn't have told you that I would spend the next 20 plus years in the commodities business. So it's kind of, It's funny how that happens.
It's interesting, though, if you kind of take two steps back and kind of look at it from the 30,000 foot view, you did your preparation, you went and got schooling, then you took initiative and went out and got a job, and then you started noticing things, trends and things like that in your environment. And then one thing leads to the next. And then probably if you were to do a deep dive on job number 1, 2, and 3, you learned something in job 1 that you took into job 2, and then you learned something in job 2. So I think that's really interesting. And then that kind of frames us, informs us, right? And now you're all in, with your company. And so talk a little bit about what you do in your firm, given all of those years of experience that you've got.
Yeah, well, and I agree with your observation. I mean, you kind of never know what's going to lead to what, right? And how when you look back, the combination of years of experience takes you to the spot, and you could never really have imagined being there. But each one of these little things tick, 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 kind of takes you to the right, to the left. But today I invest and work with companies in the commodity space. And I'll tell you, if you look around the room or the car or wherever you're listening right now, and you kind of just take a deep breath and glance around, what you're going to see is every single thing that you can see right now is probably either grown or mined in its first state. Whether that's glass, that's sand, whether that's wire, it's copper, whether it's that knob, it's petroleum for plastic. And so we live in this world of finished products, but actually everything that we see comes from the earth. And, that's the commodities business, actually. And so, what I do now is I like to write about it and help people to understand, if you think electric vehicles are really interesting, guess what? Copper, cobalt, lithium, nickel, those are all potentially really interesting investment ideas. Or what is the big one right now everyone's talking about? They're talking about AI and all the energy it takes to run these data centers, the CPUs. Well, guess what? Where does that energy come from? It can come from hydroelectric dams. It can come from nuclear energy, one of the cleanest forms of energy. It can come from coal, not as clean. And so, when we're thinking about allocating our own personal resources towards investment ideas, we don't often appreciate that we as individuals understand and see opportunities all the time. We just don't seize on them because we don't know how to frame those opportunities. I mean, if you're working at an AI data center and you realize that all of these open fields around are going to have data centers on them, you might say, well, how do I invest in that? And you might arrive at the answer that, gosh, I should buy a uranium company that's publicly traded because these things are all going to get powered by nuclear. as an example. You might also decide you want to buy NVIDIA because they're making the chips. So, we lose sight of the fact that as we go through our lives, we actually have tremendous insights in how to invest and what we should be investing in because of our experience. We just don't know how to reframe that and then think about what actually that opportunity could look like for us. And so, one of the things I like to do is just simply write about these commodities and not as much give advice. Each person has to find their own way and think about their own, situation and circumstance and how they want to express an opinion. But it's helping people be more aware of these trends and ideas as they pertain to the commodities markets.
What I love about what you just mentioned there is that it's kind of like a foundational approach. And the word innovation came to mind because you're doing the antithesis of innovation. You're letting other people go, hey, look at this plastic commodity. Let's make this new thing. Whatever this is, fill in the blank, 19,000 bullet points of all the innovation and the cutting edge things we see out there. But you take the approach and say, that's all fine and good. That's, potentially shiny object syndrome, or that's the flash in the pan. Let's let someone else go out there and create and sell and invest and market those things. But at the end of the day, what are the things that you need to do to have all of that? And that's where you're coming from, that commodity, that base, that foundation, because probably you would make the claim you can create anything you want, but at the end of the day, you ain't going to do it without this and this and this and this. And if that's the case, then investing in and raising awareness in those commodities really is super, super important. I really like how you framed that.
Yeah, like you cannot have a modern life. I mean, you cannot drive to work without copper, without oil. I'm sorry. Even if you have an electric vehicle, guess what? It's still oil, right? Like those goods are still transported. So and another way to think about this is think about the gold rush in California, right? This is long before our time here, but who made all the money? It wasn't the miners, actually. Sure, there's a couple here and there that made the money. Just like in tech, there are those Facebooks and Googles and those unicorns. But actually, the picks and shovels made all the money. The service providers and while commodities aren't necessarily service providers, I think when you look at the technology side of it, you're taking on tremendous risk. And there's big reward there. But, another way to think about playing those themes is to consider the basic materials that are going to comprise of those themes, right? And that's really where I spend my time and my mental effort.
In all of your writing and research, what are some of the trends that you're seeing that impact commodities today?
So, I mean, there are a few trends. Obviously, the AI boom globally and just the power that it's going to consume is a major trend, one of the most important trends. And then there are also these geopolitical trends. An example is China. China has globally, over the last decade, spent billions and billions of dollars buying and investing in nickel and lithium. And so there's a security of supply issue. So China, and oftentimes it's demonized, but that's not the case. They've legally and through the front door gone out and made investments all over the world. And so they control the nickel supply, for instance. And that means that they have the first call on nickel. And nickel is critical for a bunch of things, including batteries. And in this example, what that means is that there are potential situations where geopolitically certain types of minerals, metals could be less available to the United States. And so, the geopolitics globally really matter. The AI power consumption is a big one. And then, of course, electrification in different forms. So you have the obvious story around electric vehicles and, the copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium that goes in there, the tin. But the secondary effect of that is, of course, our power grid. America's power grid, we have not invested in it, and it's decades behind other countries. And so you also have the need to kind of rework through our power grid, and that's a huge impact on copper. So these big global changes that are underway have impact. And even actually, and people don't think about this, but even things like in Ukraine, and these smart bombs that they're shooting, the U.S. and Russia and everyone else, there are some very esoteric minerals in there that, get used up. So all these things that are happening in the world, when you turn on CNN or Fox News or, wherever you get your news, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, every single one of those global events is having an impact on the underlying commodity market in some way.
Wow. One of the things you mentioned there was AI. And I think that if you were to say AI and technology and AI and communication, people would go, yeah, you can't turn the computer on without hearing about AI. For me, and I'm not in your world, but AI and commodities don't seem to be the obvious match there. So talk a little bit about how AI is impacting commodities.
Okay. So there's once again, there's going to be different levels. There's just, sort of basic stuff like commodities trade on exchanges. And if AI is driving trading at a hedge fund, it's impacting the price of commodities. So that's an example of one way. Another way AI is impacting commodities is through logistics. So once again, as the logistics chain becomes more efficient, and more organized, and more transparent through the use of different AI models and programs and tracking, it becomes a more transparent market. But I think the most important way that AI is impacting a certain subset of commodities is through power demand. And, each one of these large language models, if you think about it, those models are kind of like the plumbing, right? Like, so the large language models in AI is going to be the plumbing of artificial intelligence. But what's going to happen now, we've plumbed the house, is we're going to come back and put water faucets all around the house. And the water faucets are going to be the specific engines that are related to a given task. And so the power that's being demanded right now is probably a drop in the bucket, because all really the power demand is the plumbing that's going in. But as soon as all the taps coming in this analogy, right, and the water starts pouring out of the taps, the power demand is going to increase exponentially. So how is power created? Uranium, coal, solar. Solar panels are highly linked to silver consumption. Wind turbines, hydroelectric, every single thing I've just mentioned is a commodity. And so the way that AI is going to impact commodities is by increased energy demand, and therefore increased commodity demand to supply and or create that energy.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I also think about the phrase easy access. So if AI gives easy access to that type of information and investment opportunity, then that just really catapults momentum and velocity and also awareness, don't you think? I mean, part of what AI can be doing is bringing awareness to the mission and the messaging that you're bringing up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's a different kind of route, but certainly like the use of AI in terms of like transmission and dissemination of information is something that's happening rapidly. And in a way it's scary. I mean, it's not necessarily what we're going to talk about today, but just the creation of fake videos or that look like a person. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, had these two videos that he created, and he was interacting with himself effectively and asking himself questions. And I have kids. I asked my younger kid who was real. I have them on a split screen, like which one was the real person and which one was the AI. And my daughter couldn't tell. And
Wow.
so, I mean, that's scary. And I think we're heading there in a lot of different levels on the human experience with AI. Have you seen the movie Ready Player One?
No.
Okay, it's also a book. And, it's this futuristic place where this kid is playing a video game and he puts it on, kind of like Apple's new headset, which if you haven't tried it, it's crazy. There's this dinosaur video. And you're stepping into this virtual world, which of course is being run by algorithms and AI. And you can kind of envision how that's going to completely change the human experience when people are able to already play video games and kind of escape reality. But when they're able to do it in a situation that seems so real that they don't have the desire to go meet other men and women for dating, for instance, when that becomes that real, I think there's going to be huge impact on society.
100%. You mentioned clean energy, and I know we don't have 19 hours to talk about that because that's probably what it would take just to get the first bullet point out. But what are some good sources of clean energy from what you research and write about?
Okay, so the reality is nothing is clean, right? Like everything is shades of gray. Like there's no perfect form of energy. And I think unfortunately we live in this highly politicized world where we can't have a real conversation. You're either conservative or you're liberal or you're this or you're that. And it's unfortunate because actually what energy is about trade-offs. Because when you build a windmill, guess what? The windmill, depending on how it's positioned, it might harm wildlife. What is the life expectancy of that windmill? How do you dispose of it? And I'm not, by the way, I'm not disparaging windmills. I'm just trying to point out that, you know, solar panels have silver and what happens when you get rid of them and are they toxic? And so, each one of these different types of energy capturing devices, or let's call it, each one of them has an impact on the environment. And, it's not fair to say that coal is bad 100% of the time or that nuclear is good 100% of the time. And instead, the conversation really needs to be about a balance of these different options. Like if you live in Arizona, you should have solar. Like that's for sure. You live in
Yep.
Southern California, but if you live in Alaska, like I don't know. That doesn't probably make any sense at all, right? And so we have these binary conversations, which kind of reflect the rhetoric in America today. And it's unfortunate because that's not the reality of these different types of energy. And instead, you really need a mix and you really need it to be tailored to a location and have a real conversation. This thing can be clean, X form of energy can be clean, but for the fact that you're shipping, the underlying commodity from the southern tip of Africa. So yeah, it looks clean, but then what about all the pollution it caused along the way? So it has to be a more holistic conversation about the supply chain and every aspect of the supply chain. An example is electric vehicles, which I love, by the way. But you know what? A lot of that cobalt comes out of the Congo and has historically been dug by 12-year-old boys in a mine. I mean, that's just
Yep.
really bad stuff. So these conversations are very complex, but people's attention span and just the kind of environment in America today is so binary that we're not having real conversations about the supply chain and what does something mean to be green or not green. It's a worthwhile thing to consider how we can do that, even when we disagree with the people that we're talking with.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot more than just the surface headline that you might see online or in the news. So I totally get that. What about carbon credits that we hear about? Is there something you can clarify that for us?
Yeah, I mean, look, carbon credits aren't a solution; they're a transition. And carbon credits, it's an interesting thing because you would have thought that environmentalists would have embraced it, but instead you have everyone has attacked them. And I think that's unfortunate because what carbon credits do is they really allow for companies to transition to a lower carbon consumption environment. And what we've seen in the last kind of 24 months is really an attack of these credits. And I think it's unfortunate because, preserving a 20,000 acre stand of trees, like I just don't see how that's bad. I don't see how
Yep.
that's negative. But these credits have been attacked, and I think carbon credits in the regulatory sense aren't going to go away because they're a form of a tax, in California and Europe. But the voluntary markets is going to have to continue to develop, and I don't know what it's going to look like.
I think that it's like with a lot of things in life and business, we don't know what anything's going to look like in 5 days, 5 months, 5 years. So it's just you make decisions based on the information that we have right now, make wise decisions, and then adjust as we move forward based on new, good, reliable information.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, I think this has been really helpful for us and just to understand all of these aspects of what you're up against. I think that's been so powerful of what you have been able to research and write about, Anthony. If someone is interested in learning more about your writings and your topics, what's the best way that they can learn more and then also reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so obviously Twitter is a great way. Anthony Milewski, I'm on Twitter. You can go to theorgangroup.com. So it's www.theorgangroup.com, or on my website, which is anthonymilewski.com. And, if you DM me on Twitter, I'll always try to get back to you.
Excellent. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, and I hope to be back someday.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.